Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm just going to give you a moment or two to trickle in. We've still got a few people joining, and then we'll get started. I'm um I'm based in Sydney, and it's lovely to see that rain clear up. It's a beautiful day here. If you'd like to pop in the chat where you're joining from, we'd love to see, yeah, where everyone's dialing in from. I think we've got some people from Australia and New Zealand on the call today, so it's exciting. Oh, it's raining in Adelaide. Oh, Perth, Canberra, Brisbane. So good. Oh, it's early in Perth. Thanks for joining. Oh, I love it. Fantastic. All right, we're a couple of minutes past 11. So let's dive in. Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first look, the True State of AI in Finance report session. We're so excited to be sharing these insights with you. My name is Shauna. I'm the marketing manager at Weel, and the team behind the ANZ CFO community. I'll be co-hosting today's session. Now, before we jump into intros, I just want to start off with a little bit of housekeeping, a quick reminder of how the session will run. If you have any questions along the way for either Damon or myself, please drop them in the QA function or in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. We're aiming for just 45 minutes today. Hopefully, we'll be a little bit under that to get you back to your days. But with Q&A, it tends to run over a little bit. But short, sharp session. We'll also be directing you to a survey after today's session. It's just 3 quick questions, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. It helps us to create more content that's relevant and valuable to you. Okay, let's dive into the intros. Well, hello again. I am Shauna. As I said, I'm on the marketing team here at Weel. I've been here for 3 years now, and in that time, I've been lucky enough to work on some of our flagship events, the CFO Summit, the CFO Awards. Um, I was also lucky enough to be involved in putting this report together, so particularly excited to share it with you. Um, Prior to Wheel, I worked at Deputy and some other Australian scale-ups. Um, I guess the things that these companies have in common is that they help remove the pain points that many leaders face, and frees them up to spend time on their more enjoyable and strategic work. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm really excited to be joined by Wheel's CFO and COO, Damon Hornstein. Damon, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, love to. And look, great to be here. Thank you to everyone for joining. So Damon Hornstein, CFO, COO at Wheel. So my background, spent just over a decade at Citigroup in their global M&A corporate advisory team. So working with boards, CEOs, CFOs, finance leaders on some of their most important and transformative decisions for their organizations. More recently, about 4 years ago, joined Wheel as we take this business from a startup to a scale up. I think the commonality between both of those roles, I get to spend lots of my day working with finance leaders and helping them solve their problems. Love to spend time sort of hearing about different solutions people have found. I think in finance there is a lot of commonality in the challenges and pain points different teams are facing across industries. And this session really is a way for us, and this report actually is a way for us to just give back some of the insights and wisdom that have been shared with us along the way. So yeah, look, very excited to be here, Shauna, and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Damon. Now, before we dive into the discussion, I wanted to give our audience a quick bit of context about the report we'll be referencing today. This session is built around the findings from Wheel's recent research report, The True State of AI in Finance 2025 Snapshot. Last year, we conducted a survey with over 200 finance leaders. Then in June this year, we ran a follow-up pulse check, and we've pulled together the latest findings along with some research from various sources to share with you. We will be sending the report out to everyone later today, so keep an eye out for that. This session is really just touching on some of the, I guess, high level findings, but really encourage you to read through the report once we send it out. I'm going to start just quickly and touch on the big picture. So, when researching this report, we found some striking comparisons between Australia, New Zealand, the US, and global averages when it comes to AI adoption in finance teams across wider organizations. If we look from left to right, we can see a clear adoption gap with only 30% of finance teams in Australia actively using AI compared to 58% globally. Then moving along, we can see a significant skills gap with fewer than a quarter of Australian employees trained in AI skills compared to almost half in the US. And lastly, the ROI group, with just 4% of Australian CFOs reporting a positive return compared to 92% in the US. So this ROI piece isn't surprising given the gaps in adoption and workplace training. Yeah. Now, turning to our own data, we saw gaps between interest and execution play out clearly. 55% of companies are running AI pilots, but only 15% have integrated AI into day-to-day operations. And interestingly, only 5% rate their automation as very high. So I think what this shows is experimentation is happening. Full adoption and meaningful transformation remain a real challenge. Damon, I think this is probably a good spot to start our discussion today. I wanted to hand over to you first and talk a little bit about your opening letter in the report. You said some interesting things in there. If I could just pass over to you to talk about the changes you've seen in the role of finance, over the past few years.
Yes. So look, I think the shift that we're seeing today, Shauna, is perhaps one that we've seen play out before, just in a different way. So if we were to roll back, as you see on the points here on this slide, if you go back to the 80s, I mean, there was a time when what we now call spreadsheets was done on paper. Like a spreadsheet was a spread out sheet of paper. And the initial spreadsheet application, so your Lotus 1, 2, 3 and the like, came out and really revolutionized what was possible. And if you went back to the 1980s, you would have seen very similar thematics playing out to what we observe today. A lot of people like testing things. There was a lot of personal devices being used for this outside of the corporate environment. A lot of concern and angst over what the future held, what the job outlook was for people that were doing this sort of work, and what it ultimately meant. And I think what happened during that period is people started adopting those tools. I think the people that were fastest to adopt those tools ended up being the best placed in the digital spreadsheet world. But the way people were using those tools changed so significantly. And I think today we take for granted things like scenario analysis and complex modeling in cases and assumption changes that can take place. But once upon a time, that just wasn't contemplated. It wasn't part of what the future people saw. We saw that again play out as people moved to cloud-based finance tools. So, once upon a time, your accounting, your Xeros and your MIBs, well, let's say Xero, but your MIBs of the world would be desktop-based applications. And we saw a big shift as everyone moved from desktop-based applications to cloud-based, and just the capabilities that unlocked in terms of integration with external providers, the ability for multiple team members to work in parallel. And I think today we see the whole thing play out again. The transition towards AI-enabled finance capabilities will be the next, we believe, seismic shift that plays out. And look, my encouragement when people are thinking about it is what the tools can do today is quite impressive. But if you look at what those tools could do, spreadsheets, cloud-based tools in the first iteration relative to where we are today, it is worlds apart. So I think if you just believe that there will be continued innovation in this space, I think AI has a huge role to play in finance. And And the roles that we are all doing today, I believe, will look very different to the roles we're all doing in 5 years time. So looking forward to the discussion, Daisha, and I think we'll dig into a lot of those pieces as we go through the discussion.
Yeah, me too, Damon. No, thank you for that. I guess moving on to the next question, which is a big one. Why aren't teams scaling AI? And I'm going to throw another one straight at you as well. Maybe you can answer them at the same time. But as a finance leader yourself, do these results come as a surprise to you?
So I think there's a few bits here that are probably a little bit timeless, and that is, I think if you went back to the 2000s or the 80s and you asked the same question about why people weren't spending more time on some of those strategic changes and themes in their industry, you probably would have got pretty similar results, Sean. I think people would have said there is a lack of time. There is compliance concerns with it. History says those things are usually overcome. So what does this mean? Like, why do we see this happening? A big part of this, I think, is finance leaders often struggle, myself included, with like prioritizing between reactive compliance, operational based activities and spending time on those more strategic, growth orientated customer pieces. And I think AI is kind of just the latest incarnation of this. That is the strategic thing that a lot of people would like to be spending time on. But in their roles, there are lots of things pulling them in the other direction, away from that, into a reactive world, into a compliance world. So look, I think that is a constant challenge. How do you free up time to spend on strategic pieces? And I think, the best finance teams we speak to are able to break away from the two, find automation and things that we'll talk about today to help free up time. Now, the second thing here, compliance and risk. I mean, this is positive in the sense that finance leaders take this seriously. They are aware of it. They are naturally well versed in this area. I think many are taking a more cautious approach to this, but I just sort of point back to those earlier comments. There were similar concerns when we moved to digital spreadsheets. There were similar concerns when we moved to cloud-based software. I think those concerns will allay over time as the technology, the controls, the familiarity with these technologies increases. But certainly today, it is something that many see as a barrier, and we can talk today, Shauna, about how some teams are overcoming those things in the near term.
Yeah, I think that's a great place, to dive a little deeper on. How can finance leaders make sure their teams are using AI safely and responsibly without creating new risks for their organization? Do you have any tips on that?
So if you were to look at like the biggest enterprises, they would have very strict controls and policing in place around what data can leave the organization. So devices, both company owned BYOD devices, pretty heavily locked down with security and controls, pretty extensive reporting and monitoring on what data is going in and out. That's the enterprise world. Now that is well beyond the capabilities or the investment available to many businesses. So most businesses, SMB, mid-market businesses, would instead, or those that are doing it well, I think, would instead look at sort of cultural and training to solve this. Now, what do I mean by that? You're probably not going to have the opportunity to police every bit of data leaving your organization. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the cost. But what you can instead do is like just make sure the right cultural setting is in place so that the wider team are at least aware and familiar with these topics, these themes, why it's important to the organization. For most, it's as simple as customers, suppliers, vendors have trusted us with sensitive information, and we owe it to ourselves to keep it secure. And then on the training side, it doesn't need to be super extensive, but even just helping build some basic familiarity with the team. A common place people start is just having framing, Shauna, of data categorization. So you might have like public data, which is generally available on the internet or in the public domain. your internal confidential data, which is proprietary to the company. And then you might have your, at the very top, your like sensitive data, which would be things like private, personally identifiable information or employee data or salary data that is super sensitive. Now, even just having those basic tierings can help team members in their day think through the risks or the implications of what they are contemplating sharing. And I think if you can get a little bit of cultural um, alignment, a little bit of training in place, I think organizations will go a long way in a practical sense to getting some of those compliance and risk concerns allayed.
Yeah. I love that piece around culture as well. I think if they're not already, employees will start testing the waters. I think we had something like 41% of companies said their employees are using AI weekly. So if you can build that safe culture around it and kind of guide people, I think, it sets you up for success later. So no, really, really good
And I
piece.
think that's really, really relevant, Shauna. The state of the art models today are consumer applications. Now, this isn't always the case in like software for businesses. Often the state of the art software is like an enterprise offering that's accessible only to the biggest companies. But actually, any consumer can go and access the state of the art language models on their personal device. And I think, as you quite rightly point out, this creates its own set of challenges because everyone goes and installs ChatGPT and Claude on their personal device, and you often get some permeation of data or company ideas onto those devices. So, look, unless you've got the resources to police it, just getting that cultural setting started will go a long way.
Yeah. And on that resourcing point, I think maybe something to touch on is where finance teams should be focusing their investments. I think, there's an expensive way to do it, and there's also some smart ways that you can start testing the waters. So, I guess what's your advice to finance teams? Where should they be investing?
Yeah, so I think if you go back to maybe just before I touch on what's on the screen here, if you go back to those earlier comments, there is a lot of people testing things, but they're not moving forward with those ideas. And I think, again, take that consumerization of the technology. So lots of people have ChatGPT or something on their phone. They're testing it. They're often testing it in isolation, maybe not even with necessarily the blessing of the wider company. They're just sort of doing it. Now, I think that in turn means it's very hard to measure any sort of ROI. And you mentioned some of those statistics. Enterprises and businesses today are getting positive ROI from this. A lot of this lacks a coherent vision for the organization. So, what does that mean? For finance teams to really initial steps to improve it in the organization, it's really about coordinating different activities that are going on internally. So, if you have a team and you've got a couple of people that are experimenting with AI and like really pushing limits and pretty familiar with it, how can you like capture some of those ideas in the organization, like get people talking, sharing it with the wider team and kind of cross-pollinating ideas. And equally, you're probably going to have some members of your team nervous, cautious about what it means. How can you provide a grading to also participate in that conversation? So I think just bringing the two groups together, like bring the whole team together to share those ideas, is a big first step, Shauna, that is very practical, very easy to undertake. And what you're ultimately trying to do is increase the average fluency in AI across the organization. So, get your best ideas disseminated so that the average person in your team has a greater level of AI fluency than before. And I think as you start to achieve that, that's when I think the organization itself starts to derive real value, and you can then coordinate people towards a real strategy.
Yeah. Some good points there. Um, I'm just looking in the chat. I think we've had a question come through. Um, trying to decipher this. Any good courses that well conceived to face the challenge of answering the question of how the current finance professional will remain relevant? So maybe that's one around, I suppose, with the adoption of AI, will the role of the finance team and finance leader remain relevant?
So I think you would have said the same thing, I think, back in the 80s. Like people thought that spreadsheet meant that a whole wave of like roles were no longer required. And I think there is some truth to that. There were some roles that no longer had as much relevance as spreadsheets came to the fore. But what it meant is actually the accounting, the finance profession as a whole actually moved to adding more value because a lot of the menial tasks, a lot of what the spreadsheet now does say, like just automating, adding up columns and rows of data, became automated. So that meant that everyone kind of gained a superpower, which was they could now conduct scenario analysis, forecast analysis, um, uh, really being in the driver's seat. It meant that everyone had to provide more strategic value and really, I guess, increase their contribution. And I think you'll see a similar thing play out through AI in the next few years. There are parts of the role that will become automated that will no longer be required, but organizations generally do not look at things and say, great, I can now move faster, I can now make more strategic decisions, I will just stop. What that usually leads to is people saying, great, now that I've got better insight, better visibility, let's go to the next level. Let's push the limit. Let's invest. Let's grow. So I think it's probably hard for anyone to sit here today and predict what that future looks like, so much as it is very likely to be very different. And perhaps one message I would share today is just as finance leaders being at the forefront of this wave is a great place to be because as it changes, as the role evolves, you can sort of lean into that and really ride the wave. I think you know, accounting finance roles have changed a lot over the last couple of decades. So I don't see this as being anything different to what already plays out, which is people are always looking to find their own way to add more strategic value to the organization. And this is kind of the latest, as I said, latest incarnation of that we see.
Yeah. And I guess throwing back to that piece around getting started, the experimentation phase, and when we think about things like investment, something I've heard you talk about in the past is looking at what the organization's already using, your current tech stack. You don't have to be going out and outlaying money or even using the new free tools available. You can look at what the organization's already using and test the elements of AI that are already in there. And I want to use Weel as an example. I guess, what are some of the AI features that we've developed to improve accuracy and security? If you want to maybe talk through some examples and get
Yeah.
people's minds thinking about that in their current tech stack.
Yeah. So look, I think everyone, Shauna, myself included, but I suspect almost everyone on this call will be under some degree of pressure from be it boards, investors, external stakeholders, their CEO, their CFO, to show some progress on AI. I think we've talked about roles before, but I think companies as well, like no one wants to feel like they are left behind in this shift that is happening. So everyone wants to make sure every organization wants to make sure they are at the forefront or at least not being not behind the eight ball on this change. So, there is pressure to show progress. How can you show progress? Yes, one of the easiest, almost practical ways to show progress on this is just having a look at the existing tooling that you have and what AI functionality is available to you. Because making progress with AI doesn't necessarily mean you are going out and using the language model in its raw form through an API. It can be that you've got great tools, great services already available to you that are now just able to go a little bit faster, or a little bit more efficient with AI functionality. So yeah, Weel, I think in that light is a great example. I mean, we are a spend management software platform. One of our core things that we've always done for finance leaders and businesses is helping them to look through the expenses that are coming through and seeing which ones are valid and which ones are not. Very simple example, you've got a receipt that says Joe's Cafe coffee $4.30. The card statement comes through and says Square Payments Joe. Now a human is pretty good at like looking at those two things and saying, ah, yes, that makes sense. They are aligned. Historically, though, that was something that computers would struggle with because you really had to like, yeah, the character recognition didn't naturally line up. Language models are excellent at this. Yeah, they're really good at like taking those two data points and saying, yep, there is a pretty high confidence those two things are a match. That is one thing we've like put into our product recently, where as every expense comes through and every receipt is uploaded, just looking and saying, is there high confidence those two things are a match? If they're not, then flagging it for human review. Now, what's the relevance of all of this to, to finance and what we're talking about today? As well, two things. One, I think that is a great example of like AI utilization in software that for anyone that's already using our product benefits from immediately, and they've already got it set up in their stack. And two, I think it's a great example of like automating things for finance teams. So what was previously done as a manual task, and it was possible for a human to do, but it was just time consuming, is now automated. Hundreds of hours then get saved over the course of a year, but without increasing the risk for the organization either. So I think it's really about, yeah, can you find smart ways that through your existing tech stack, it doesn't have to be Weel, like just any of your technology products. I think every modern software, cloud-based software product is probably doing something in AI at the moment. So are you looking at what's available, pushing those tools, testing them to the limit? Because I think utilizing those should yield some really positive results.
No, it's a really good point. Use what's available to you. I love it. Something we practice here as well. Just a quick reminder to the audience to drop any questions in the Q&A. I've got one more question to ask Damon, and then we'll jump into some questions from the audience. Before we get to Q&A though, Damon, final question for you. Why do you think finance is so well positioned to lead AI adoption across an organization?
Look, I think, yeah, maybe you start with like, who else is going to lead it, right? Like, is there someone naturally in the organization leading it? Usually the answer is no. So then everyone kind of looks around at everyone else at the table and says, well, who is going to drive this for us? Like, how do we make sure we are not left behind? Uh, yes, you've probably heard me share. I do think finance leaders have a lot of unique skills or traits that make them actually really well placed to lead it. So what do you need to do this well? I think you need good fluency in like data and analytics. That is something that finance leaders have in spades. Like the quality of the prompt and the context you can provide language models is directly proportionate to the quality of what comes out on the other side. So if you can get great data in, you're more likely to get great, insightful things out. So that is probably a starting point. Next point, we talked about earlier was that governance and controls piece. Well, again, finance leaders are used to working through governance and controls for anyone that's gone through an audit. That is a key part of what you're thinking about and actioning. So there's great understanding of those considerations. If you're going to unify it across the organization, you need to be able to tell a story and share a coherent narrative. As I mentioned before, you're going to have some people that are excited, some that are less excited, perhaps a lot of different views on like what the different pathways are. It really needs someone that can stand up and share like a unified story and vision around what it means for your particular organization. And then the final one is stakeholder management. So if you want to move away from all those disparate activities in the organization and bring them together, you need to understand how each part of the organization fits into that, what the consistency is. Again, finance leaders are great at stakeholder management through, if nothing else, like the budget and forecasting process that goes on each year. Yeah, that requires going into each functional area, understanding what is going on in each of those teams, and bring that bring that back up. So you put those pieces together, Shauna, that data and analytics, that governance and controls understanding, that storytelling ability, and finally that stakeholder management. And I think you've got all the pieces there to successfully drive it in the organization. So look, to my earlier point, I think there is a great opportunity for finance leaders to like really be at the forefront of this change that we're seeing in the organization and really, I guess, embrace it as an opportunity. I'd encourage you to just people to think about like, do you have the skills to drive it and lead it in your organization? Because chances are there is no one naturally pushing it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And a great question to kind of, round out the discussion. We do, however, have some Q&A questions coming through from the audience. So I might jump to those. We have one from Anonymous. There's an argument that you can't reach competence without making your bones with low-level tasks. AI is heading towards replacing all the mental low-level tasks. Do you see a problem here with training new and fresh generation of accountants because basically they're losing exposure to those low-level tasks? Do you think that will impact the future workforce?
Look, I think this is still a big unknown how that
Yeah.
piece plays out. I think that what you are seeing though is a lot of the newer entrants to the workforce are actually pretty familiar and pretty savvy with AI tools themselves. So I think they probably bring a new way of working. They probably bring a new way of looking at problems. I think a traditional view is to say, yes, there is like an apprenticeship model that needs to play out, and you need to serve your time doing a lot of those traditional, I guess, lower level tasks, and you will, uh, in time, like build the experience to go and do the higher level tasks. I think, you know, newer workforce entrants perhaps have a different way of looking at it. They can see a much faster path to doing a lot of those tasks through AI-enabled tools. They're more familiar with them, or they've played with them, or they've just kind of freed up from the traditional way of thinking because they've just never been in that environment before, and they will approach it in new ways. So, look, I just think it's one of those things where change is inevitable. It's kind of yet to be seen how this will play out, and I wouldn't offer any prophecy on this, but it is just change, and change is always something that we all need to get comfortable with.
Yeah, agreed. And some of the youngest people in our organization are often the ones that have the best ideas in terms of how to, a new way of doing things, I suppose. So, it's also an exciting time too. Um, Now, this is a question that's not a plant, I don't think, but Joanne's got a point here about our accounts payable function. Looks amazing. We'll be syncing that function to MYOB. I will find out for you, Joanne. I'd say it's a yes, but I'm not allowed to publicly confirm or deny. So we'll get in touch with you after the session. Next one. Are there any safe AI tools you would recommend for finance and accounting teams in particular?
So, look, I would say, like, it's hard to like give a blanket something being safe. I think that's probably a pretty broad topic, but I'll make a couple of quick comments on this. I think one, as Shona quite rightly flagged, like AI tools that are already embedded in other tools probably are easier to like integrate with the organization and get through any security compliance checks because you've already onboarded that vendor, and they probably have pretty good safeguards around how they're using that data. So that is probably a lower risk way of doing it, like just using the functionality embedded in your existing tools. The other thing I would say is I don't I don't necessarily think you need to go and buy like super specialized tools for finance teams to like make and learn on this. The As I mentioned, the like frontier models, so your OpenAI, ChatGPT, your Anthropic, Claude, Google, and Gemini, like those frontier models are like genuinely state of the art. And even just using those and testing with them in their raw form, like the consumer form, really, enables you to like start practicing and learning and building familiarity. And the important thing about that is I think as you build your own familiarity and fluency with this, I think it then enables you to better understand what the risks and safeguards that you might think about for your organization are. And actually just experimenting, learning, playing around with it, even in a, without any sort of customer or sensitive data, just starts to give you a feel for what the risks might be. Because I think they're nuanced and unique to each organization. So that'd probably be my two tips on that front.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. Um, so I've got questions flooding in. I think we might only have time for one or two more before we wrap. Here's one from Nina. I struggle to understand the difference between AI and automation. Um, if we are automating tasks, are we utilizing AI?
So I think there's a big overlap between the two concepts. I would say automation is probably the bigger catch-all bucket, and AI is one way of automating things. But I think finance has been a story of automation for many years. I think it is like the classic role in the organization where there are so many parts of what happens each day that you look at and you think intuitively there has to be a way to automate that. Now, it's history has shown often those things are harder than they seem intuitively because automating things might require system changes, process changes, technology changes, governance changes. It's, often things are harder than they seem. I think why AI is particularly exciting for finance teams is that it might finally bring that unlock to automating a lot of the things that seem intuitive but are not yet automated. I think everyone here would have parts of their day where they spend time doing things and probably the same thing that they did the prior month and the prior month and the prior month and think, God, I wish I could find a way to have that automated in some way. AI may be the answer to some of those things. It may not be for everything. So yes, I think very similar concepts, and I think the future is pretty exciting for what it could mean for automating repetitive tasks.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's super exciting. I feel like we're just at the beginning of it. Do you think we have time for one more? I've got one from Greg. Um, we use Sage Intact. It offers a host of AI-driven insights and analysis, but the trade-off is we're not willing to that they're not willing to take, so that they've got to share the data to feed their language model. Is there a fair trade-off on this? Um,
So I think early on, a lot of the products did want access to data to train their own models and to improve them. I think what we've seen over time actually is as consumers, as businesses get more savvy around this and more aware of the potential risks that flow from it, I would say more organizations, more products are now offered with an explicit undertaking not to use any of the data to train their own models or for those purposes. So, look, I won't comment on Sage themselves and what they're doing, but I would just say there is a general trend towards greater privacy of data that's used for AI products, and I think the trend is one more towards data not being used for training. And I think that's really just where we're at in the technology cycle. I think early on, it seemed to many imperative that you captured this data, but I think there's a lot of advances being made now with synthetic data and other things that mean that there's less need for that data to still achieve the objective. So I think if you wait and as time plays out, you will see less products demanding this, and indeed many products, if you ask or like push on the commercial or legal terms, you can get a carve out from them using your data for training anyway.
True. That's a good point. Um, Conscious of time. Um, Apologies if we haven't got to your question yet, but we'll be in touch after the session. I think we've got one more slide to showcase as we wrap up, but after this session, we will be sharing a copy of the report. But I also wanted to quickly call out some of the other resources on the Wheelhouse. Now, we've got a range of reports, guides, templates, things that are designed to help finance teams with their day-to-day. So we'd encourage you to go and check that out. I'm also going to quickly launch a bit of a poll. If you've enjoyed this session and you'd like to hear more from Weel, or if you'd just like to be kept in the loop for any future webinars, events, masterclasses, please let us know and we'll put you on the mailing list for that. Your moment to answer. And while we're waiting, yeah, Damon, I think we've done a good job. We've come in just under the 11:45 here in Sydney anyway, minute mark, the 45-minute mark. Great session. Thank you for sharing your insights today, and a huge thank you for everyone for attending. We really appreciate the level of engagement we've had. It's been awesome. And yeah, as I've mentioned, the report will be in your inbox later today, so keep an eye out for it. And if you have any questions in the future, you can reply straight to that email and we'll do our best to answer them. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.